Welcome back to Heightscast, the podcast of the Heights School. This is Rich Moss with you from the campus of the Heights in Potomac, Maryland. We are here to talk about the education and the formation of young men fully alive in the liberal arts tradition. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for continuing to share our podcast, our mission, our vision of education with your friends. We are tremendously grateful. Thanks to everybody who came out to Convivium a couple weeks ago. It was incredible. Art of Teaching Boys in January is full, so do register for the March iteration of Art of Teaching Boys if you'd like to join us. We would love to have you. That's it by way of announcements. I am delighted to welcome back to the podcast both our headmaster, Alvaro de Vicente, and good friend of the Heights, Father Carter Griffin. Father Carter is a priest of the Archdiocese of Washington, raised Presbyterian. He converted to Catholicism while attending Princeton University. After graduating in 1994, he served for 4 years as a line officer in the United States Navy prior to entering seminary. Most recently, he is the rector of the St. John Paul II Seminary. He is also the author of Why Celibacy, Reclaiming the Fatherhood of the Priest, Cross-Examined Catholic Responses to the World's Questions, Forming Fathers, Seminary Wisdom for Every Priest, and most recently, and just one that I have kind of on my low shelf of books that are within easy reach, Forming Families, Forming Saints, all published by Emmaus Road Publishing. Our headmaster, as you all know, has been headmaster since 2002, Heights graduate in 1983, graduate of Georgetown, undergrad, and law. Alvaro and Father Carter, welcome back to the podcast. Good to have you both.
Thank you, Rich.
Great to be here. Thanks to you both.
So we are going to talk about, I'd say this is a conversation about discernment, vocational discernment, but also kind of touching on questions of deliberation, vocation more broadly, because this is sort of sparked by an article that I saw in the Wall Street Journal a few months ago, and the topic or the title of the article was, "The Catholic Church Has a Manpower Problem, Fewer Priests Every Year." And so, I think there's a lot to say even about the headline. There's a lot of questions that raises, but there was a quote in this article that it kind of punched me in the stomach, because I think it really resonated, maybe in part with my own experience, but just definitely with what I see a lot of young people grappling with today. And the quote, as I shared with both of you, I'll share with our listeners now. "We live in a culture caught in the paralysis of endless options, where choosing one path feels like closing the door on countless others." So it sets up this world where if you're a young person and you're thinking about your vocation, is it marriage? Is it the celibate life? Is it the priesthood? Is it religious life? Like, what am I doing? And you can have the desire to do the right thing, to serve God, but you're just kind of like caught like a deer in the headlights of just so many different options. And so naturally I thought of both of you because of the incredible number of young people who you accompany as they conduct this discernment in their own lives, and just the different kind of life paths that we've all chosen, we've all been given. And so I thought, let's talk about this. Let's talk about discernment. Let's talk about the experience of young people as they're discerning. And I think there's a lot of things that touch on that. So thank you again so much to both of you for coming in. And let's begin, as we often do here, just with definitions. I think having definitions for words can be helpful as we talk about them. So, Father, let's start with discernment. I mean, what is discernment? Do we kind of overuse that word? If so, why? Just discernment. Introduce us to this concept.
Yeah, I think an important distinction that I would make would be discernment, and I think you use the term like deliberation or even decision making. That both are important, but discernment I think adds a quality of making a good judgment according to higher principles, right? And I think that doesn't necessarily have to happen in a Christian context. We have a kind of a finer point that is put on it as believers, but pagan Greeks can also undergo discernment according to higher principles of wisdom and so forth. But the unique or the additional factor for us as Christians is that we are discerning not just according to the principles of wisdom, but actually discerning also what the will of God is, right? And we believe that God's will is not an arbitrary will. He's a good father. He's a loving father. And so discerning his will in our lives is also a way of discerning how to pursue happiness at the highest level, at the supernatural level. And so it's always relational. I think that's the key. That's the key distinction, is that it's relational because it involves our relationship with each other and with mentors and those who can help us along this path. But above all, it's relational because it's in relationship with God that we can make a good discernment. So the qualities of discerning well are going to be, they're not just going to be, are you clever, or are you, have you put the variables together properly? It's going to be that stuff may be relevant, but it's going to be fundamentally what's your relationship with God like. And so if we're going to pursue, good discernment, that also means pursuing a relationship with God.
Alvaro, how does this resonate? It's fun. It's Thanksgiving. So like the young grads are like flocking back to school, and they're in this moment.
Right.
How does this kind of relate to what they might be experiencing, or what do you see?
I think it relates very well, and I agree with the definition that you presented for the cardinal discernment, and I especially like the idea of according to higher principles. I must say I have a difficulty with the term discernment the way it is used in two ways. One is that it implies that there is a right decision to be made. Rather, there's one right decision that you conclude, a path to follow. And I think it is perhaps that understanding that leads to the uncertainty of how do you find the right decision, and how do you know for sure that this is the right decision. But also, I think discernment as a process is necessary, but it needs to end at some point. And what I see now with some of the alumni, some of the young people, whether it is priesthood or marriage, frankly, that discernment is seen as an ongoing process for the rest of my life. And I think that's a problem. I think at some point you end discerning, you commit, and then you no longer discern. Now you just commit and dedicate yourself. So those are the two. When I hear the term discernment, I must say I cringe a little bit.
Can I add a third?
Sure.
Maybe a third concern would be that discernment is applied sort of univocally. It's applied equally to all matters of decisions. In some circumstances, you could have I have to discern, which movie I'm going to watch with my friends at the same level. Using the same term as I need to discern which woman I'm supposed to marry, or what vocation I'm supposed to pursue, or whatever it might be. And so you end up in this perpetual cycle. There's a great quote from I think it was Francis de Sales, who says, we measure gold ingots with great care, but two small coins, you just do a quick evaluation. His point was that if it's the gold ingot, you need to take your time. It still needs to end.
Yes.
But don't apply that same level of seriousness about discernment. I mean, God doesn't really care that much which movie you watch with your friends,
Right.
But I mean, you need to do, it's two small coins. I mean, you're supposed to do a quick discernment, but it's not it's not at the same level. So I think maybe that's another way that the word can be used in a kind of a cringy kind of way.
Yeah, so overuse.
Yeah.
And also, I don't know what you think about this, but it seems to me that one of the characteristics that we have culturally is that we're looking for a perfect life. And for some, that means comfortable. For some, it means pain-free. For some, it means to have access to whatever I want to do financially. But I think even for those who are seeking a vocation of total dedication, they're still looking for a perfect life, meaning that it should be perfectly happy. Yeah. That somehow, if this is my vocation, I should be perfectly happy and contented all the time. And I think it is that cultural influence that bleeds into even those very well-intentioned, good, generous, faithful young men seeking a vocation that leads to this sense of ongoing discernment. Because if 2 years into my saying yes to this vocation, I'm not somehow fully happy, then necessarily it must mean that this is not my vocation, right? Yeah. Because that was the promise. And I do think that that's a cultural influence that, at least seems to me we're just aware of in terms of the young people and advising them.
Alvaro, you said that in our when we talk about vocation, sometimes the way we speak about it is that there is only one path, and that does put a lot of pressure on us. In a sense, man, I better get this right. And I mean, yes, do get it right. And of course, there's there's pressure, but is there an other side to that equation? And maybe I'm just asking you to kind of explain more what you meant by that, because I think it's critically important.
Yeah, and I'm intrigued by the relational comment that you made, because here's the way that I was thinking about vocation, is that often marriage, for instance, the young man who says, how do I know that she's the right one? Well, do you mean that there's only one woman out there in the world that you're supposed to marry? Because if that's the case, that is incredibly arduous task to accomplish, right? To find that one woman and to know that she's the one. It seems to me that the vocation discernment is relational, and see if there's the way that you meant it for the Carter. Relational in that I am attracted to the good, and that means attracted to God, and to God in a particular way, and that would be the vocation. But I'm attracted because I've been prepared to be attracted to it. Formation, parental involvement, other people in my life, they had kind of shaped my heart to be able to discern the good and be attracted to it and want to pursue it. But I still have a choice to make, whether to pursue that good or not, right? And if I begin to pursue the good, then I'm more attracted. Now, is it that there's only that one good that we'll be attracted to? I don't know. I'm attracted to God. How I come to this particular vocation, sometimes it seems circumstantial, right? Like I was attracted to Opus Dei just because my dad at one point said, why don't you go on a retreat with these people? If he had sent me with the Franciscans, maybe I would be a Franciscan. Like, I don't know. Yeah. It seems circumstantial or providential, right? But is it that from the beginning, I only had one vocation, to Opus Dei? Like, I don't know. I say yes to it, and I believe, I've never thought that it would have been my vocation, right? I thought sometimes that maybe I didn't want to keep doing it because of alternatives, but it was always clear this is a temptation against perseverance. It has nothing to do with vocation, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's clear to me that this is what God wants me to do, but it's not clear to me that that's what God wanted me to do from the beginning, or whether it was a relationship between the good that was presented, my saying yes to it in small ways and continuing, and then all of a sudden I'm walking in this vocation for 40 plus years, right? Almost 50 years.
Wow.
Right. That's the way I see the relationship.
I think that's right. I mean, relational. I think, primarily for me, is kind of a reminder that we are created by a good and loving Father, and that He guides our steps along. He's sort of made us in a certain way, like a good Father, and prepared us for a certain path in life, and. But it also means that as a good Father, if we don't, for whatever reason, choose that, and He's going to put us on the path, and even these seemingly circumstantial things, which are in fact providential, as you said, that He's going to put us on that path. But we can also say no along the way and choose a different path. Life might be a little bit harder for us than it would have been otherwise. But He's a good Father, and so He's gonna sort of back our play, and He's gonna help us in this vocation. And I think about this like when guys leave the seminary, and it's not always a great discernment, and then they go off and get married, and I have to I tell them, it's not like God's gonna abandon you if you were called to be a priest. It's like He's still your loving Father. He still loves you, and He's gonna help you now in this new. It may be a little bit more difficult than it would have been if you had followed the path that you did see, in fact, before you, but for whatever reason, out of lack of courage or something like that, chose not to go that path. But I think so the relational quality is also that trust that apart from sin, God is always going to kind of be with us, and no matter what decisions we make. And that also reduces, I think, the anxiety level. It's like, no, I do the best I can. I see the circumstances that I'm in. I see my talents, and I see my desires, and I pray, I get good advice. And I make a decision, like the sermon has to end. And in a part, you don't really worry, because it's like, well, I'm doing the best I can, and God knows that, right? And kind of to not worry so much if this is the right girl or that's the right vocation, or just do the best you can, and then move forward and stop kind of looking around. You talked about all these choices that people have. I looked it up before coming here. I said, how how many kinds of potato chips are out there right now? There's 383 brands of potato chips. I mean, you go into a grocery store and you're just overwhelmed with choices. What if I get the wrong potato chip kind? You know, what if it's not as tasty as, you know, the next one is? Like, oh my God, you can be paralyzed choosing which potato chips to get, you know? And that obviously is a silly example, but it's kind of emblematic of the kind of lives we live. And, you know, the opportunity cost of of choosing this vocation means you're not choosing any of these others. Choosing this girl means none of these other girls. And the only way to move forward in life is to make some of these decisions. And so to reduce the anxiety level and trusting that God is going to be with us every step of the way, it seems to me essential, you know, to discernment.
Yeah, and I just can't believe that if you choose a vocation in good faith, that God will not give you the grace that you need to live the vocation as well as you can.
Yeah,
right. Like if you go to God and say, listen, even if you went and said, I really don't know what you're asking me to do. Like, I'm thick, I'm dense, I don't hear anything. I'm going to do this, but I'm doing it for you. I just can't believe that he won't give you all the grace that you need, right? As a good father that he is.
Yeah.
I love that. There's so many questions, so many things to be explored. Because I wonder, just parenthetically, it's almost like I wonder if we. I'd be careful here how this comes across, but I mean, in a certain sense, do we take our lives too seriously? You know, like
I think we do.
Like, there's a way that we have to, but then there's also kind of like
I think we do.
Like, reality's big.
I think we give way too much importance to these, whatever, 70, 80, 90 years we spend down here. You know, I think in heaven, I think we'll look back and realize, man, I took myself way too seriously.
You know, a phrase that I use with the seminarians is that you have to learn how to throw your life away. You know, like, and that's what anyone who's been in love knows that, like, that's what lovers do. They throw it all to the winds. They just, like, whatever the dangers, whatever, they just throw it because this is worth it, right? And that sense of the cavalier sense of being able to use our life, spend it on something good. Don't spend it on discernment. Like, spend it on doing something good with your life. Yeah. You need a certain amount of discernment, like you said, good faith, but at the end of the day, just do something. Do something worthwhile.
Yeah, just pick one.
Pick one.
Yeah, I think it goes back also to this thing of looking for the perfect life.
Yeah.
Like, we take ourselves too seriously because we have to control everything.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, back in the 16th century, they didn't control anything. Right. Right. It was much easier to throw your life away because your life would be taken away from you anyhow. Might as well, act freely and throw it away.
Yes.
And now we tend to believe that I can just create my cocoon and I can make my life be as good as I want it to be.
Yeah. That's super interesting because I wonder if that approach to discernment has in some respects bled into that approach. Which approach? The approach of almost looking for absolute certainty instilled by an unequivocal divine sign that can be nothing short of miraculous, like manna or whatever, mist on the floor in the morning when you pray to the Lord to, like, show you clearly, or the hand on the wall, whatever. So if that's our approach to vocational discernment, have we then brought some of that into just regular good old fashioned decision making? Like, where do we send our kids to school? Where do we live? Do I take this job? Is there something different about how you approach those decisions or discernments relative to how you should discern vocation?
I'm not sure there is, really. I mean, I think that there's a lot of it may be a different degree of importance or relevant, but I mean, I think for Christian parents who have a child and they're trying to decide, to use the neutral term, trying to decide where to send their child to school, for them not to engage in any kind of discernment with God, that is to say, in a non-relational way, it's just kind of a calculation without any questioning of, like, well, what does the Lord want from us right now? I have a priest friend who, like, when a couple comes in and say, we've decided to get married, his first question is, that's great, have you asked God? But, like, bring God into these decisions, even the small ones. I think that's perfectly acceptable, especially important ones like where a child goes to school. I mean, that's not a small decision. But I think it's a difference maybe in degree, but not in kind. But in a sense, it brings down kind of the vocational discernment to, I think, a healthier level when it's like, it's kind of like the same sort of thing. It's like, this is not where my child, this is like, what should I do with my life? And there's actually a graduate from the Heights, who's a priest, and he, his discernment for the priesthood was like, well, this is actually a really great way to spend a life. I think I'll be a priest, and it's like, and obviously he had the church has to discern. I mean, I'm not trying to do away with the whole seminary system here, but his point was just that it was actually a pretty simple decision for him. You know, he didn't agonize for years and years and years. And people have different paths, and some are going to agonize more than others. I get that. But it was something kind of good about that. And so in some ways, maybe I'm contradicting myself earlier by saying that, you know, you don't discern which movie to watch. But I think you do need to make decisions about what to discern more carefully, you know, rather than just sort of making an economic calculation, for example, going back to the school, you know, which it's more than that, right? There's a deeper, like, what does God want for these? These are his children before they're my children. So to use that as an example.
Yeah. Yeah.
How much of it is also that in the vocational discernment, there is a submission to the institution that you are discerning a vocation through. That is that, you know, when taking a job, you know, if it's an important decision, you pray about it, you think about it, you talk to people, right? You balance the goods and drawbacks and so forth. But in the case of the vocation, how much of it is, in addition to doing that and being more prayerful about it, right, for sure, that you entrust yourself to the seminary, or you actually date, right? And once you begin that process, you almost assume, I wonder if this is the right way to go as a seminarian, right? To assume that this is what I'm going to do, unless the institution, the seminary itself, at some point taps me on the shoulder and go, nice try, kid, but not for you. That is that the discernment is not, I don't own 100% of the discernment. That by looking into this vocation, I'm actually open to sharing the discernment process with the institution that I believe is inspired by God. And therefore, if the institution says, yes, you're ready, that should carry a lot of weight. Because that, in my mind, is probably about as clear a message from God as I can get, right? And, you know, in marriage is somewhat similar, right? That, you know, dating, the importance of dating well, because through that process is when I will find out whether this is meant for me, perhaps because she'll break up with me. That's a discernment, right? I didn't want it, but she discerned me out, right? in that case. So I wonder if that's a particular quality of vocational discernment.
I think that's part of the relationality too, right? It's in relation to something bigger than myself, whether it's an institution like a seminary helping me discern the priesthood, or a dating relationship, which is still bigger than myself. And, you know, I tell the seminarians, like, this is, in fact, I think the parallel is very close, because the first year or two in the seminary, I think, really is kind of, does this feel right to you? Does it seem right to you? Are you settling in? You know, can you take to philosophy? Can you live in a community? You know, all these different things that are just kind of out there, and you're sort of seeing where your heart's moving. But at some point, you need to make this kind of shift where we call it like a presumption for permanence, you know, where, or commitment, you know, where you're, in a sense, your discernment is finished. And now it's up to the church to say, you know, we also, and I say the church gets 51% of the vote. I mean, you may be convinced you're called to the priesthood, but it's like going and telling a girl, you know, I'm going to marry you. That probably is not going to work, you know, because she gets 51% of the vote, right? And so I think every vocation that kind of has that kind of similar pattern template. But when you're talking about a lesser but still important discernment, like a profession, it seems to me there's still an element of that, right? Because you may have always wanted to be a poet, you know, a professional poet, but then you realize what poets typically, you know, make as an income. And you're like, well, I can't do that because I want to raise a family too. You know, so there's this kind of back and forth, and that maybe is in conversation with your wife. It's like, maybe I can't be a professional poet, you know. So there's an element of kind of the back and forth, the relational quality, even in some of the lesser decisions. But in the vocational decisions, it seems to me almost paramount.
Yeah, it's just like such a beauty of marriage that once you submit yourself in marriage, every decision thereafter is no longer yours and only yours. You know, it's a shared decision. So that, you know, it's amazing how that vocation informs everything that you do thereafter.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, totally. I like that presumption for permanence.
That's a great term.
That's really good. And yeah, the quote that I go back to often, I was chatting with Mike Ortiz. I've mentioned this before on the podcast, just 'cause I think it's helpful. But I was talking to Mike Ortiz early on, and the teaching days, the grading, and all the rest of it. I'm like, Mike, you've been here like 40 years. Like, how are you doing it? Like, how do you do it? And he said something like, well, the first 20 years were the hardest. And I'm like 5 years in, thinking to myself, oh my gosh. But in a certain sense, it's true. There is, and I love your point that, okay, like, what's your vocation? I mean, part of the way you find it is by submitting to what you believe to be the call. And then in time, it becomes clearer and clearer, because you can't fully discern until you've wholeheartedly committed yourself to something, which is kind of a paradox and a challenge. How do you find the right one? But then again, it makes sense. And dating came up in both of your answers just now, and I'm glad, because I would like to speak to some of those wonderful young people who are trying to figure out, okay, like if you believe, that you're called to marriage, or maybe it's just a part of the discernment generally. You're thinking about the priesthood. You're going on these, like an Emmaus retreat, and trying to figure out, where am I called? But maybe you've got a pre-existing relationship, or you're dating, whatever else. So within that context of dating, discerning marriage, discerning a spouse, you can kind of see the corollary there too, where you have like this paralysis of endless options, in the sense that there's like, I don't know, like a billion people out there. And is it really the case? I think we kind of have this, we've grown up on Walt Disney movies where there's one and only one, and you've got to find this person, and then it's like, everything will be fine forever, happily ever after. And I just wonder if that's the right way to think about it, because for many of us it might be true, but is that image of like the one and the only that's out there, is that the right image for us as we're pondering marriage and the choice of a spouse?
I think it is. Yeah, you have to find the one. No, I'm just kidding.
I was going to say, this is going to get exciting now.
I saw the beginning of a yes, the beginning of a no. I said, all right, let's go. Good television.
I just need some bourbon in this club right now to get,
what are you drinking?
To get to the next point.
I think there's, all joking aside, there is a sense in which God has a plan for us, right? And He has. I don't think we should kind of totally demystify the thing, or sort of take all the romance out of it, right? There is somebody He has in mind for somebody who's called to marriage, and because He's outside of time itself is a creation of His. So I think it's a lack of, it's a lack of faith in God, lack of trust, and even lack of understanding of His transcendence. When we sort of remove God entirely, we say, well, there are all these different girls out there that are compatible with me and I could marry. It's true from our perspective, right? There are many, many people out there that would make excellent wives or husbands, as the case may be. And so in that sense, I think we don't need to like be constantly just being on edge, worrying if we miss the person. Like, what if you just walked by and I didn't notice her? Like, that was that's not how God works, right? He's bigger than all of that. And so another phrase we use in the seminary is, to use that analogy, is, trust the providence that brought you here. Right? It's like, and people look back at me like, well, what if I'm only here because so-and-so mentioned it? It's like, well, maybe it's just maybe I'm not supposed to be a priest at all. Well, that's a silly way of thinking about it, because God is bigger than all of that. He knows even our bad intentions, if you have a mixed motive, like maybe you're going in part because you enjoy wearing black or whatever, like, it doesn't matter. He can work through anything. And I think that's true for dating as well. Like, He can work through anything, and trusting that He's bigger than all of our circumstances, our desires, our deeper desires, even the things we don't know about ourselves. And about this other person. And so I think there is trust that's needed there, but also this recognition that there are many, many people from our limited human point of view who would make outstanding spouses, and sort of to trust the providence that brings you to this person at this time through whatever means, however you met her, like, trust that if it's as you're making good decisions moving forward. That's, I think, good discernment.
I think we've all had the experience of being in some airport away from home and running into somebody we hadn't seen in 10 years.
Yeah, totally.
And you think, amazing the number of choices that this person made and I made for us to be in the same place at the same time,
That's a great image.
And run into each other. But I often think, I wonder the misses that I've had. I wonder the times when that person was there, but I decided to go into the restroom and he just walked by, and I'll never know, right? And that's the FOMO, right? That's the FOMO that I think we can bring into relationships that you were referring to. Like, what if I took a right and she took a left, and I just didn't run into the ideal person from our perspective? And I agree that God, outside of time, providentially, helps us out. In terms of me making my choices, like a young, an alumnus, if he asks, should I marry this woman? I think the question is, why not? This past reunion, alumni reunion in October, I had an interesting encounter where the wife of an alumnus came and said, "Finally, I meet you. Thank you so much," and gave me a big hug. And I'm wondering, thank you about what? Because 14 years ago, my now husband went to you and asked you if he should marry me. And I do remember that conversation. What I didn't know is that he had told her before proposing, well, I got to talk to my headmaster. And for the last 14 years, she's been wondering, what is going on? Like, why is that a thing, right? And she was appreciative that somehow I said yes. And it's not, I never met her, but I think for me the question was, well, why not? You like her. She seems to be great for you. You're great for her. You guys met, forget how they met, but I mean, you met at some point. Like, why wouldn't you marry this person, right?
But what's beautiful is that this guy wanted to receive your blessing, and there's something very paternal and relational in that. Again, it's part of his discernment,
yes.
which is not to be denigrated. Not that you're doing that, but I mean,
yes.
That sense that it's actually really beautiful that he came to you, and maybe I don't know if you met her or not, but oftentimes the seminarians, after they will bring their girlfriends to they want me to meet her.
I hadn't met her. I met her for the first time this October.
Oh, nice.
14 years later, right? Because they were in a different town, they were out of town, and all that. So there is that desire to check, and I think maybe that's another component of this whole discernment is the spiritual director. Not that I was for this fellow,
Sure.
I was just a
Sure.
Former mentor, right? But the spiritual director, they need to have somebody confirm my thoughts to make sure that I get out of my head, that what I'm hearing in my prayer is something that I'm hearing, not that I'm just thinking about over and over again like a washing machine. So maybe that's another characteristic of discernment is the surrendering to a spiritual director, not to surrender my freedom,
Right.
but to seek the advice and the clarification that a director can provide.
Right, absolutely. I mean, yeah, because it seems like that's such an important part of I mean, really just any decision-making process, but certainly this discernment of important questions. I mean, having mentors, having spiritual directors who are also praying for you, who know you in a dispassionate way, and can offer you counsel about these big choices. So I think in a certain way, we've been looking at this generation almost like from the outside in, and maybe we could kind of flip it and sort of see things from the inside out, like the young person who is discerning marriage and a spouse. And I love how you put it, like in a certain sense, you've got to commit before you fully hear the vocation in a way. It's like decades of life and service. You're like, yes, this is definitely it. Rooted in choice, but it's like stepping into that person who's maybe in the chapel, or who's on a date or whatever else. Like, what are any guidance or principles for good discernment as these folks are making these big life choices? It's a completely open-ended question, and we've talked about it a lot already. But
well, I mean, I think
one
thing that can be helpful is to distinguish between objective and subjective kind of inputs or variables, right? So the objective meaning something outside of yourself, subjective things going on inside yourself. So let's say we're talking, maybe let's sort of like professional, like a profession, right? So you look objectively and you see what kind of jobs are available, what sort of opportunities are out there, what compensation might be, and where I might want to live, and you're looking at objective things like that. But you're also looking inside, like, what are my desires? What are my capacities? What am I talented at? So you're making you're looking, it's not so sort of mysterious that you're not using your mind. I mean, you're still using, and the same thing would be true for like discerning marriage. Like, is this person compatible with me? Can I take that laugh for the rest of my life, or can I, or can she, right? Or is there a compatibility of an objective or a subjective of nature? And I think the question of commitment, I mean, you're right. I mean, some of it is, in the priesthood, we have the advantage of years of discernment and years of kind of preparation. Oftentimes in marriage, it's 6, 8 months or 12 months or something like that. It's much quicker. And so the need for trust in God in some ways is even more. Because you think about what a definition of a commitment is, basically saying yes to the unknown, right? Whatever comes in the future, whatever difficulties, whatever sufferings, whatever joys, whatever successes, whatever failures, all of it in sickness and in health, and that's what we say, that's what couples say in the marriage rite. And so you're saying yes to the unknown in every vocation, which means that, I think there was one of the fathers of the church said, talk about the priesthood again, he said 100 years is not enough time to prepare for the priesthood. So and that would be true for marriage too. It's 40 years is not enough time to prepare to be a teacher at the Heights, right? There's always going to be more. And so in that sense, at some point, we just have to say, well, I don't know what the future holds, but I have enough. I've looked at it objectively and subjectively. I'm throwing myself in this direction. I'm going to throw my life away, do something good with it, and just kind of trust that God's going to kind of be with me every step of the way there. So I think if you're in the chapel and you're discerning or you're dating this person, sort of use your mind, kind of go through the steps, but at the same time, and maybe get good advice, talk to people that you trust, but then at some point be willing to just make a decision and be comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I really like that. And what I kept thinking about is, it's not a transactional decision. Right, it's not going to the chapel and saying, "Okay, God, if I do this, you'll give me a happy life." It's not you're not buying a happy life through the vocation. You are throwing your life away. You're surrendering, and you're trusting that God will take care of you, even when you don't see it emotionally. Right, even in those darker days when you don't see it emotionally, that's where trust really comes in, that he's taking care of me even though I don't feel it at this point, because it's not my feelings that really matter. But in marriage, I think the same way is, you do have to look at do we get along, are we compatible, even the little things like, can I deal with that mannerism forever? Will I ever get used to it? Will I ever begin to love the mannerism? Or is it going to drive me crazy forever, right? Do I bring it up with her now? Do I wait? All those things. But at some point, it's non-transactional. I'm going to give myself to this person forever. I'm committed. Right? So I think, and that's something that I don't think we're used to, right? In our society, we're not used to non-transactional relationships.
Yeah, and I think we're also not, going back to another point you made, we're also not used to not setting ourselves up for kind of the perfect life in the future, right? The number of options that children have growing up, the number of shows they can watch, right? The number of types of candy they can eat. It's just is almost an infinite number of choices before them every step of the way. And then suddenly we get to this point where you need to start closing doors. You need to start saying no to that for the rest of your life. What we're asking of them is almost impossible given the way that children are sometimes raised today. And it's not even anyone's fault. What parent doesn't want to give the child options for, So it's understandable that we want options before us, but somehow maybe a formational kind of goal for parents can be sometimes restricting options, having fewer options, and it's okay, and you're still going to be, you can still be happy and you can still move forward without all of those options before you. Somehow getting used to kind of an asceticism of options, and getting used to that might help prepare someone a little bit better. But even if somebody hasn't had that asceticism growing up and they've just had all these options, to be able to kind of mortify that in that moment, and because in order to move forward, you're going to have to close doors. You're going to have to say no to a lot of stuff, right, in order to have a really thriving life. And so the sooner someone kind of gets used to that and just sort of owns it and be like, okay, well, I'm saying no to all these other girls by dating this girl seriously and maybe getting married to her. And I'm just willing to do that, and just there's a grieving, I suppose, that has to happen almost, So I'm saying no to all of that. But in order to move forward, I have to.
Right, right. Yeah, because it seems like the discernment is directed towards some sort of decision acceptance. And sometimes, we just get stuck in this permanent state of discernment. And I think that's totally facilitated by, just the paralysis of endless options, as this Wall Street Journal article mentions. And just a brief parenthetical, I think we have, because I think it is, there is an aspect to choosing your vocation where you do have to, in some respect, throw your life away And I know we've got listeners of different faith traditions, and so I think this can sound perhaps it could be heard as pretty stoic and kind of hard-hearted.
Yeah.
But I think, in the gospel we hear, you lose your life, you're going to find it, and so what's the flip side? What's on the other side of this? What's like the Augustinian, I was restless and now I'm resting, because ultimately it's not just like, it's not, you're disregarding your life in a way, but you're not at the same time. Like
Right.
you're losing your life so as to find it. What's like the other side? Not that it's a transaction, but what's at the other end of this?
I love the passage of the gospel where I think it's Peter who asks Christ, "What about us that follow you?" Right? Right after, harder for a wealthy man to enter the kingdom of heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. Right? That little slit in the walls of Jerusalem. And for those of you who follow me, life everlasting, 100-fold on earth, and life everlasting. And the part that I like there, life everlasting, obviously it's the end game.
Yeah.
But 100-fold on earth.
Yeah.
I wonder, does that mean that if I have $100,000, I get 10 million? Right? And I think what that means, and this may seem contradictory to what I was saying earlier of looking for a perfect life and all that, I think what it means is, if you follow me, whatever earthly happiness you could attain through your own merits and virtue and machinations, I'll multiply by 100 and deliver to you. Right? You're going to be so much more satisfied as a human being than you would ever be if you tried to do it without me. I think that promise, Christ's promise, I find very satisfying, very rewarding, very motivating, or inspirational, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful, and I think I use the term throwing your life away, and I still do mean it's kind of in a sort of a tongue-in-cheek sort of way, because obviously we're not throwing our life away. In fact, we would say it in the same way that a guy would throw his life away because out of love for a woman that he loves.
Absolutely.
It's that. I think maybe a better image is not so much throwing away as like letting go of, like this desire to hold on to and like life hack ourselves to death. The phrase we used before, that somehow we were holding on to something and trying to create our own. That's a source of anxiety. It's a source of frustration in the future. I think it's a source of unhappiness. It's a source of feeling like you've been robbed of something that you deserved, and then the later regrets that happen. Whereas if you just kind of let go of all of that and you sort of say, like, I'm going to give myself over to this person or to this vocation, fundamentally you're saying, I'm giving myself over to God and I trust God. Like that is the source, I think, of much more peace and much more joy and just a sense of a thriving life. And so it's true that the seed has to die. We have to let go of something. We have to close those doors and do these other things we've been talking about. But you're doing it because when you do that, then you actually grow up and, you become you have a much more thriving life, much more fruitful life. It may not be easier. There may be suffering, maybe even more sufferings. Maybe you could have protected yourself from some of those sufferings. But even with those sufferings, it's going to be better. Right? It'll be more thriving and more human, I think, than that life that is overly controlled and kind of, clamped down on.
Yeah.
And by the way, I see, just by looking at our students here, and we're, mostly Catholic, right? Not exclusively, but mostly Catholic. But even among the non-Catholic families, I do see that the young men are looking for this. They're more young men now looking for a life of value, and there is more, I think, of a realization that you can't buy value, that you can't get that. That somehow value comes when you embrace something else, throw your life away, or let go, right, for a greater cause. I see that, and I think a lot of credit to a lot of families and how they are shaping and forming their children so that the children are able to see the value of a vocation and they have the heart to want to follow it. From that point of view, I'm very optimistic that better years ahead, the best years are ahead of us, whatever that means.
Right,
but I do see a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of young men who are enthusiastic about having a meaningful life, which means a God-centered life.
Can I add one thing real quick?
Please,
and something you said I think is so true is that you made a distinction between seeing what to do and then having the courage to do it. I forget how you phrased it, but that's how I sometimes talk to the seminarians. I say, like, discernment is about knowing what God's will is or discerning God's will, but then having the courage to follow it. And you kind of need both. You can't have one without the other. Or you can, but it's not going to lead to actually the decision that, that where you're going to move yourself forward down in life. So it may be that, going back to the person sitting in a chapel and praying about, should I marry this girl, or should I enter this profession or join, whatever, to sort of say, have I built the habits that are going to enable me to discern God's will in my life, to discern whether this is so the habits of prayer, that, and maybe someone is like, I don't know if I should marry. Well, maybe I need to start with actually building a habit of prayer. Maybe I need to start with getting some good advice from a spiritual director, or doing some good spiritual reading, or whatever it might be. So, like, that might be the answer, rather than making this decision now. Is, how can I hear the voice of God more clearly? Or number two, it may be like, I know deep down I'm supposed to do this, and maybe it's a hard thing for me to do, and I just don't have the wherewithal to do it. So I need to, like, grow in my virtue and in the fortitude and in the capacity to say yes to that call. And that might be, again, maybe you have to step back, and I need to start saying yes in my daily call before I can say yes in my lifelong call. So maybe there's some elements of my own life that need to grow before I'm capable of making a good discernment.
Yeah, we had now an alumnus who 2 years ago, I think in senior year, decided to run a marathon the month before the marathon. And with no training, ran it and finished and did well. And everyone agrees, okay, that is unique. That's a freak of nature, right? You don't run a marathon unless you prepare. But I wonder if sometimes when you talk about discernment and a person saying, well, I got to pray about this, if you don't have a life of prayer, it's like running a marathon without preparation. Like you just don't know what you're doing, and you're not running the right pace because you just don't have a pace. So there is a lot to be said to all young people for, do you want to discern well? Begin praying now, even though there's no question. But begin praying now, because you need to run 5Ks so that you can run the marathon, right, when the opportunity comes.
I like that. And the question I want to ask is, well, how do you pray? But I'm not going to ask that right now.
But how much time do we have?
Exactly. maybe the better question is, because and I want to say this with a lot of respect and humility, in the sense that every discernment, just like every person, is going to look different. And I also, I think there are a lot of people who are paralyzed by options because they're looking for an unreasonable amount of clarity. At the same time, there are many people to whom God communicates himself, with a remarkable clarity that's like cutting and like incisive. There are people that might, hear things or see things or whatever else that in their particular life, like that's the way. But I think but I think for most of us, dare I say, and maybe here I'm just asking for your thoughts on this this nascent thought, but for most of us, when we go into the chapel and we're praying through vocation, we go into the chapel wanting that hand on the wall, but we're probably not going to get something like that. Is that fair to say? And so, like, what do we do with that as a young person who wants absolute clarity right now?
Yeah, I love an insight that Saint Therese of Lisieux had, which was that she often went into her prayer asking a question. I'm going to get it wrong, and I'm paraphrasing, but she very seldom got an answer during her prayer, but she always got the answer later, right? So, but if she hadn't prayed, right, she wouldn't have received that. And again, I'm sort of butchering it, I think, but it's that idea that God speaks to us not just in those moments when we happen to be in the chapel or in our room praying or something like that. Those are like you're enkindling a heat source, that kind of fills the rest of the day. And so it's not really about, I need to go into prayer so I can get my answer during prayer. It's that I'm entering into this spirit of listening to God and being available to Him, disposing myself, releasing that kind of clutching hold that I have in my life, letting Him take over. And it's that understanding which I think then you, over time, the answer comes. And it might just be like your heart is resting with this thing, or like it just seems right. She seems like the right person to marry. It becomes clear and clear. And you never have the writing on the wall. You never have this. It's just like, it's like, this is right. and then your conviction grows, and over time, and then of course you have to ask her. And so that may end the discernment early, as you said, Alvaro. But but you did the best you can, and then because you're in that spirit of receptivity to the Lord, active receptivity, right? Not passive, but you're actively responding to his dispositions and his inspirations in prayer. But it also helps you do it during the rest of your day, and that's what I think sets you up for making a good discernment.
That's
I really like that, and I think the way you set up this whole conversation from the beginning of discernment as a relational activity, because what I'm thinking about now is so true. You may not find the clear answer during the prayer, but that is like saying, does my wife always tell me what to do when we talk? The more time we spend together and the more time we talk, the more I will know what she wants, even if it's unspoken. I just know because we're in a much closer wave, and I don't need her to tell me. I just know. And I think that is part of relationship, right? That there's an intimacy created where the minds come together and definitely the hearts come together. And maybe that's what prayer actually does. We're asking for an answer, but actually what is happening is that we're beginning to meld our mind into God's enough that at some point we'll know.
And it's both sides of it, right? Because the more time you spend with her, the more you know what she would want, but also the more you fall in love with her and the more you want to do what she would want, right? And so in prayer, we're receiving that capacity to hear God, but also we're growing in our capacity to say yes to God.
To say yes, to want to say yes, yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And I wonder, like when Saint Therese is having her prayers answered, it's probably, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the majority of those answered prayers are not going to be necessarily, again, handwriting on walls outside of the chapel, or just sort of like these, piercing moments of light. Although, again, like we believe that God can manifest himself in that way if he pleases. But it might be something that someone says, or something that a sister mentions, or like something that happens with her health where she wants to go on a trip and the trip can't because of all the health things that she suffered through. So even there, it's like, I'm kind of reminded for some reason of C.S. Lewis's line. I can't remember the exact line, but it's the idea that we tend to kind of like overly, we've taken God out of our sense of reality of like, the natural. And then, so we're looking for this like crazy supernatural other, where in the reality, like we shouldn't have taken him out in the first place. There's a lot of God in the natural too. Like there's that line between the two is just razor thin. So it makes sense that he would express himself and direct us through the actual lived experience in the natural world, and we can hear him better. Here's the most beautifully complex metaphor if we pray. So beautiful. Okay, so there's so many things here. This I'm definitely going to come back and listen to this and ponder it. A couple of, I feel like we have to at some point address the actual, the headline of the article if we have some time, and just, this is not what the podcast is about, but I mean, the Catholic Church is a manpower problem. Do we? How do you, like, what's the, do we in fact, or how do you think, the headline kind of says it all, how would you respond to it, Father?
Well, I guess I'd say yes and no. There's always, in a sense, a manpower problem. There's always kind of a need for people to serve, and if we're talking about priests in particular, but any real vocation of kind of complete availability to the church it's always going to be. They're almost never going to be enough, right? I mean, and you could read stories back in the 50s when the seminaries were full, like guys were falling out of windows or so, and they're like, we need more priests. We don't have enough priests. It's like, there's never, in a sense, there's that feeling of never enough. And I suppose that's true. There's never enough as long as we're talking about good, faithful priests. But I don't think that that's really the best question to ask. I mean, because precisely the answer will be, sure, there's a manpower problem of sorts. If we want to look at just the numbers, I mean, you can look at different parts of the church and see not a problem, but actually tremendous growth and tremendous vitality. The seminary where I work is full to overflowing. We had a wait list this year. A number of seminaries would say the same thing. There are dioceses that are ordaining, in a sense, more priests than they need right now, and they're having to find military and other places where they can serve, because that's not common, and there are other parts of the country which I want to emphasize are really, really hurting right now and are dramatically understaffed and undermanned, and so that needs to be acknowledged as well. But I think fundamentally God is going to provide us with the priests that we need. And he's going to call men to it, but that doesn't mean that all of them are going to say yes. I mean, that's kind of the conversation we've been having, right? Yeah. It's like you're going to be provided with the knowledge. Yeah, I am, but I just don't have whatever it takes to say yes to that thing, and God is not going to reject me and all that. But it does mean that somebody who ought to have been a priest isn't, or had that calling isn't. So I think we need to sort of look at location and things like that, but we also need to take the bigger picture and see what is the real crisis here. It seems to me if there's a crisis, it's not in sort of not having enough priests as sort of like kind of go to the bottom line, but it's really, are we building a culture in which young people are able to hear and answer the call of the Lord? Is it a crisis of vocations, or is it kind of a crisis of faith? And I think in large part it's a crisis of faith. But I also see the beginnings, perhaps this is a stutter and it's not going to continue, but the beginnings of a real renewal in so many young people, young men and young women who are looking for the Lord and are willing to kind of take bold steps. And we see the huge groups of people coming into the church. I was talking to a priest the other day from Tennessee. He's got 170 people in OCIA, and Texas A&M is like bursting at the seams with hundreds of kids. So I mean, there are also real signs of vitality and life. And I think the fact that some seminaries are also doing very well, it's always a good sign of an institution or an organization that can inspire some people to give it all, and the Catholic Church can still inspire young men and young women to give it all, right, for the Lord. And that's a great sign of vitality in the present, but also in the future. Is there anything else?
Yeah, no, I think I agree, because when I hear that statement that we have a problem,
manpower
problem, I just don't know what the metrics are. Yeah. Right. Like what is, if you have a soccer team with less than 11 people, you have a problem, because the metrics are you need 11 people on the field, right? So that's clear to me. But in terms of the church, I don't know what that means. I don't know what the numbers. I don't know the percentage that we are down or up or what it should be. And frankly, I don't think that saying that the church has a manpower problem, I agree, is looking at it from the wrong angle. Because it's not the church's problem, it's God's problem. If anything, I would say, does God have a problem? Because he's the one who wants everyone to go to heaven, and he's the one who instituted the church and keeps it alive. It's his church, right? So maybe what you want to say is, well, God has a problem. All right, started, way early with original sin and all that. But the angle really for me is, okay, what can I do? Because if I'm here to be an instrument of God's solution to the problems that exist, as you were saying, what can you do as a director of the seminary to bring God's message to more people? What can I do as the headmaster for the school to bring God's message to more people? What can every parent do, right, to shape their children to be able to answer affirmatively to whatever vocation they have? Like, that is the interesting question. That's the article that we'd love to see. Yeah, is how are you going to be part of the solution, as opposed to just stating a problem based on metrics that I don't think exist or could ever exist.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because the church has continued to grow, as far as I know, every year, continues to grow year by year by year around the world. 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 human beings are Christian. So is that the number you're looking for? Jesus said when the Son of Man returns to earth, will he find faith? Will he find faith? Will there be anybody left? And so you have, on the one hand, the growth of the church, the continued growth of the church, and I think as well, like sometimes the comparison of like priests, to take that example, is people are often comparing it to what it was right after the Second World War or something like that, one of these enormous bubbles, and say like, well, that must be the number of priests we always need. That's never been the number of priests we've had, percentage-wise. And I think the church is also coming to a recognition, or renewing a recognition, that the role of spreading the gospel isn't really only or even primarily about priests, right? It's priests are needed, to serve but it's every baptized person's call, right, to bring the gospel to wherever he or she happens to be in the world. And so I think even looking at, like, let's say it would be nice to have twice as many priests right now. That still doesn't actually answer the question. It's still not the job of the priest. It's all of us, right? And so is that a manpower problem? I don't know. I mean, the church continues to grow. We're seeing signs of thriving life in certain places, and signs of real vitality. And at least from where I'm sitting, there's a lot of really generous young men who are discerning the priesthood.
Yeah.
I'd have a hard time saying that I agree with that article.
Yeah, it's funny because it is definitely kind of like an American New York response to this. Like, let's look at the annual report and what's the bottom line? Well, that's manpower. We need more. Get some more of those. Get some more of those. Those young men. And that's just, I don't think that's how the Lord works. But to end with maybe focus on where we're sitting as parents and as educators. I'm reminded in this context, okay, what can we do? I like how you put it. How can we facilitate a context where there is faith, where there's a capacity to hear, and to decide what it is that you want to give your life to. And I'm reminded of two very dear friends in a major metropolitan area. We're kind of both of them committed religious priests in different orders, and they were kind of having this shared conversation about how difficult it is to have these wonderful people sometimes who will go to one place on Tuesday night and have the free meal and the book talk and whatever else, and then go to the other place, the other religious order the next night, and they probably have a different place they go to. And so it's almost like the different religious groups become these like social clubs, and at some point it's like, buy in and just wait and see what happens. It's going to be awesome. And so it's easy for me to sit here and think like, man, yeah, what's, these young people just like church hopping. And then I think about, I've probably been to 4 different masses this past 4 Sundays. There's like, the 10:30 a.m. works really over here at this parish on this particular day. And we'll do the vigil over here this other day. And I think there is a little bit of that too, where we have so many choices about where we worship as families. And then like we even complicate it even more. We say, well, like the preaching over here, like the music over there, and like, man, the architecture at this place. And so is that a small thing that that we can do? Is like the American parish is kind of an interesting institution in the sense that there are so many of them. And we're just like this blessing of abundant mass times, where in some other parts of the world, like there's one mass and you walk 6 hours to get there, and that's that, and you go once a month. But is that one place where as families we could kind of like double down and commit a little bit more, or am I overthinking it?
Well, I just because I think this is really for you to answer, but I was just reminded very quickly of C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters, where one of the letters, and it's more of a Christian, not Catholic, right? One of the letters is how to undermine the Christianity of this young man they're tempting, specifically by sending him around different churches and different, it doesn't say parishes, but different churches. Because he says, if he becomes a pupil, then we're in trouble. He has to remain a critic. He has to go into the church as a critic and decide whether this is right for me, whether the sermon was right or whether the sermon should be better. And what about the music? What about the readings? What about the architecture? So as you're talking about it, I'm thinking about that. Like, yeah, maybe there's a little bit of a temptation there of going to the mass as a critic, not as a pupil.
I mean, I think one distinction that I would make is, I mean, for a family, I'm trying to. If I had a family with young children, I would be much more likely to make choices based on what's best for the kids, even if it's not like technically I should be going to this parish, or I should, I mean, if preaching in one place is not entirely, orthodox, for example, I just wouldn't bring my family to. I don't care if I'm in those boundaries, or I don't care if so. I think there are places. I think we're moving beyond that right now. Frankly, I think that, I remember thinking as a young priest, I look forward to the day when I meet somebody, at a bus stop, and they ask me a question, and I can say, well, why don't you talk to your parish priest about that? Because I remember when I was ordained, I knew I couldn't do that. I'd say, well, what diocese are you from? I'd call a friend of mine in that diocese. Okay, what priest can I rely on? And I frankly feel like we're at that stage, to be honest. I mean, it's not going to be 100%, never was, never will be. But I feel pretty confident and comfortable telling somebody on the street, why don't you talk to your parish priest about that? So in that sense, I think we're moving beyond a time where there would be sort of real kind of dangers about some parishes. And so then it becomes more about taste. And, and I think you're right. There needs to be, I think it's okay to involve preferences of architecture, music, and things like that, because those are not irrelevant things, especially the music and the liturgy. And I mean, they really are integral. And so these are not irrelevant things. But I do think that your point, which is that after you've made these, brought these different variables in, and maybe if there's any concerns about children or schools or different things like that, but once you make your decision, there ought to be staying power. Maybe it's not absolutely inflexible, and it may be that there's a new pastor and you're like, I need to actually look for a different church now. It kind of breaks my heart, but I really have to. Fine. There are going to be exceptional things that crop up, but there ought to be a certain amount of tackiness, this is our parish and this is where we go, and these are our people, and I get to know people there, and I'm in that Bible study and not the other one, even though that one might be a little bit better, I'm sticking with it. So I think it's more looking at kind of that sense of belonging, rather than kind of just duty, duty, I need to go to this place. But really investing in this community of people will bring a lot more fruit to you and to your family.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense. And so I'm I'm saying that, and I'm going to write it down mentally and think more about it, because it's a challenge, because sometimes it's inconvenient. But what I'm hearing you both say is that life is not about convenience. So okay, got it.
Stop discerning. This is really, this whole thing has been about this, Rich.
That's right. What do I do?
Finally, we got to the point.
That's right. Now we know. Beautiful. Well, there's 2,000 years and more of things to be said and questions to be asked about this incredible topic. And again, everything said with a lot of respect for how the Lord has chooses to work in the lives of individual people. It's going to look, every single one of those encounters is going to be different. And that's part of the beauty of what you both do, as you step into lives and no, it's better put, you walk alongside lives,
right?
As these wonderful lives are seeking the Lord's path, which ultimately I think does come down to a choice made in freedom, and it can be terrifying, but it's beautiful. So let us choose and choose well. Father Carter, thanks for making the trip to the Heights. So grateful to have you here.
Great to be with you. Thanks, Rich.
Absolutely, Alvaro. Thank you as always.
Great to be with you, Father Carter.
Thanks, India.
That's it for this week, folks. Thank you so much for listening. Again, check out heightsforum.org to learn more about all the good things happening. We're taking applications to Art of Teaching Boys, that is, in May. You can also check the show notes from this episode to find links to Father Carter's books. In particular, that Forming Families, Forming Saints is just an awesome one, so do check that out. Thanks for listening. We'll continue to rely on your support to keep this project going. Your financial contributions allow us to keep our doors open here at the Heights and beyond the walls of our school through our conferences, podcasts, and all the rest of it. So thank you so much for being a part of that. We'll talk to you next week. Live,